everyone, thank you for joining us today for our webinar. It is Project Planning Guide with Liz Gallo. I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. So let's go on to the next slide and we can introduce ourselves. So my name is Andrea. I run the education team here at MakerBot, and with me today I have the lovely Liz Gallo.
Hello.
And we'll be learning a little bit more about her a little later on. And so before we jump into the agenda, which is on the next slide, we just want to let you guys know that you are absolutely free to ask us any questions. We have our moderator, Sean, off camera, who will be collecting these questions. And so we have a QA at the very end of the presentation, and so we'll be able to take your questions. All right, so going into the agenda, today we will be talking about three main components. So 3D printing in education, why it is in education, and why we MakerBot are in education. And then talking about the project planning guide with Liz, and that's broken down into three main components. That's purpose, learning, and logistics. And then finally, at the end, we'll be discussing additional resources that MakerBot have for you in addition to the project planning guide. All right, so the project planning guide, if we go to the next slide, is about how to develop lessons with 3D printing in mind. And before we dive into that, we want to answer this question: what value does 3D printing have in education? So to answer that, I wanted to dive into kind of the industries that use 3D printing right now. So you can see here some of the kind of overall industries that use them are engineering, manufacturing, architecture, medical. We go into design, entertainment, and then most importantly, education. So we use 3D printing, in a variety of ways. There's dozens of different applications that can be used with that technology. So for instance, engineering and manufacturing, you can use it to create new products, test out different machines, new technologies. For architecture, you can create different types of buildings, different designs, and you're quickly able to iterate on it. And Liz, do you have you heard of any interesting stories in 3D printing that have come out recently?
Yeah, so last week or 2 weeks ago, I went to a talk here in New York City about 3D printing a home. And these people were 3D printing casts, and they were filling them with cement and building these customized homes.
Oh, wow.
And they were really excited about it because it saves so much concrete when they're building projects like that, and it's customizable.
Yeah, that's the great part. I think I've also seen that you can 3D print homes where they bring out an actual printer to that land and then print the house right on location.
Yeah,
right?
I've seen that too.
Yeah, so it's really amazing what you can do with 3D printing. And seeing all the industries that use 3D printing, we really see a need to prepare our students for 3D printing and to really integrate it into the classroom so that they can be prepared for the future job market. And so if we go to the next slide, we can see how MakerBot supports national standards and initiatives in reshaping education. And so we really believe in using 3D printing in education because it allows students to take ownership of the technology and the tools around them to design solutions for problems around them. They're able to develop critical thinking skills through designing solutions, and they become, and I think this is the most important part, they become active learners in the process. So it's not just being passive and being told what to learn, but they become part of the solution. They learn, they experience these lessons that they go through.
One of the most interesting things that the architects spoke about at that talk was that they need to help their graduate level students understand how to talk in an interdisciplinary way, talk across disciplines. So the engineer needs to be able to talk to the designer, who needs to talk to the architect, needs to talk to the materials processor, who needs to talk to the construction worker. And I think 3D printing in schools and primary schools really helps kids start having those experiences and understanding how to collaborate and communicate across a technology.
Right, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And then I think if we go to the next slide, you can see how we help to nurture this sort of growth in schools with 3D printing. For MakerBot, we choose to focus on having very easy to use printers that educators and students can use without having to worry about the printer breaking down. For educators, we have free lesson plans. We have think we're up to about 600 or 700 free lesson plans right now. And a large amount of resources that we'll be talking about a few of them towards the end of the webinar. We have a very large community of users, of educators, and you can see them there right now. So we have currently 7,000 schools that are using MakerBots in the country, and many more across the world.
Yes.
And from all those schools, if we go to the next slide, you can see some of the lesson plans that have been developed using 3D printing. And to everyone watching, all of these lesson plans are available for free on thingiverse.com. So highly recommend you check it out after the webinar. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit to Liz, and she's going to be talking about the project planning guide that she developed. And so I'll let you take it away.
Sure. So working with MakerBot, we developed a project planning guide for teachers. So this project planning guide is to help teachers figure out how to plan a project that connects to their content using the 3D printer in their classroom. Can we show a copy of it?
Yeah, of course.
So this is a copy of the project planner. You will be able to receive this in a couple of days and download it and find it on the MakerBot website to help you plan some projects for your students. We're going to walk through this today, but before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am.
Of course.
So I am a technology and engineering educator. I've taught for over 10 years, kindergarten through 12th grade in a whole bunch of different schools. I now teach graduate level classes in technology and engineering education at Buffalo State University. I studied math, science, technology, elementary education at the College of New Jersey and Hofstra University, and have been teaching with MakerBot 3D printers for over 5 years. Last year, I founded the company called Maker, where we provide professional development to teachers to help them feel comfortable and confident to teach any STEM or Maker Ed project in their classroom. All right, so our project planning guide. The objective of the planning guide, and one of my big focuses with any sort of STEM or Maker Ed tool or technology, is that it gets connected to academic content or content that teachers are teaching. It's not a standalone, it's not an extra, it is the main course of what students are learning. This project planner is to help all educators out there overcome any fears you have about planning a project. It walks you through very detailed descriptions and points to think about and questions to ask yourself to help you create the best project for you and your students. When creating a 3D printing project, there are 3 major areas to focus on. You want to focus on the purpose. You want to be able to connect the 3D printing project with the content you're teaching in a meaningful way, where your students are excited, they're engaged, it has purpose. It's not just an extra. We also think about the learning. How are students going to learn the content that they need to learn? How are students going to learn the technology that they're going to use? Those are 2 other really important factors that play a role in creating a project. And the logistics. Planning a 3D printing project with 15 kids, 30 kids, 400 kids, 1,000 kids is a lot of logistics. So this project planner walks us through some of the questions about logistics to help you and all your students have a really smooth experience with the 3D printer. In the project planning guide, it's going to act as your template. You can fill it out, print it out, fill it out on your computer to ensure that you hit all 3 of those big ideas in your projects. These icons that you see on the screen help you as a teacher know what's supposed to be happening. So there's the Apple icon for teacher work, where you're going to think about where it's important for you to think about those things that are happening to help you plan. There's the student work, where the little person is holding a piece of paper. It's information that students need to know, questions to ask students, work students have to do. It's for student work. And timing, looks like a little stopwatch, to remind you to think about timing, because everybody's under a time crunch in schools.
Always.
And logistics, the last one is logistics, to help you organize and plan, and tips for you to get this project off the ground in the right way. All right, so the first area is purpose. We want to ensure that our 3D printing projects are meaningful, that they connect with other subject areas and academic content. Andrea showed us before the STEAM and all the free lesson plans that you can find on Thingiverse for different STEAM projects. Connecting it to real academic content. If students are learning about molecules, they can create a project for that. If students are learning about volume and area, they can create a project for that. So how is it going to be real for them? How are you going to make the worlds come alive for them? When you are planning your project, you want to think about, to come up with a project idea, I think. To come up with a project idea, you want to look at your standards, you want to look at your curriculum, and you want to look at your objectives. And you want to think to yourself, what can students 3D model to demonstrate what they know? What can they create to demonstrate what they know? And what can students 3D model to solve a problem within the context? So what is the problem to be solved that I can create a solution with a 3D printer or a 3D model? You want to ask yourself, what's the big idea? Why are we doing 3D printing? Why are my students learning this idea? What's the big idea here? Why are they going to be engaged in this project? What's going to, pull them in, make them so excited about doing this? What's the driving question, essential question that's going to, get them at their core and make them continue with this project going forward? And how is it connected to their lives? How is it real for them? How is it meaningful for them? And as you ask yourself these questions, you'll come up with some objectives for your students, for your projects. You're going to think about what students will be able to do and what students will know. You want to talk about the objectives for their learning and their content, their technology and their tools, and their personal growth, their professional skills, their essential skills, the way they interact with the world around them. So what are students challenged to create using 3D modeling and the MakerBot? That's your big question that you need to answer. We have the content. What are students going to be challenged to create? When doing 3D printing projects like this, not all projects are going to look exactly the same.
Right.
And that's kind of what we want. We want some diversity in their projects. And you create that diversity by giving them an open-ended challenge. And you express that challenge to them in some of these questions below for students to work on. What will students be challenged to design and print? So you can describe that in the project planning guide in detail. What are their specifications and what are the constraints? This is something that technology and engineering teachers use all the time. It's specifications and constraints. What is things the design must have versus what limits the design? So constraints limit the design. It could be the size, it could be the shape, it could be the time it takes, it could be the amount of material, which are all really great things to think about.
Right, and I think constraints are super important because if we're in a classroom, it's not just one student's project that's being printed. Like you said, it can be 20, 40, hundreds of students. And so giving them constraints to say, okay, whatever you design, it has to be, an inch by an inch by an inch, or it has to use this amount of filament to make sure that we're using our resources appropriately so that everyone is able to design something, see their creation, kind of grow from that.
Yep. When we are talking about projects that are connected to the content we're teaching, so the next section was learning. What do students need to know about the content and the subject matter? In the project planner, there are some great ideas for connecting to content. I'll share some of them with you, some of my favorites. So if you're teaching about World War II, why don't you have students connect with a veteran or read a biography of a veteran and design and build a monument for that veteran and give it to them as a tribute. My grandpa's a World War II veteran. He would love to have that in, that experience. And that would make kids feel so engaged and powerful.
Right.
Another great project that we've been doing for years is habitats. So if you're teaching about adaptations, imagine up a new animal and then share that animal and all its features with students and have them create a habitat for that animal. What kind of land is it going to live in? What kind of food is it going to eat? And build out that habitat. Have students create a tool to help eat your favorite food perfectly, or their favorite food perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you eat cheese doodles without your fingers turning all orange?
Right.
Maybe students can come up with a utensil that'll help them do that. Another great project that we've done in many different ways with students is assistive devices. Have them go out into the world, into the school, and ask how someone needs help with something. Maybe the secretary can't reach the books on the top shelves, so your students design a solution and 3D print a solution to help the secretary reach those books. And connecting with students in different grades. So maybe building learning manipulatives for the first graders, and to help them, learn math or different things. So there's lots of different ways that you can connect to academic content and have students still do really great 3D printing projects.
Right, and it goes back to, I think, being still an active learner in that process where the students are designing for someone else or for something that they connect with.
Right.
So that, they want to be able to create something. They want to be able to accomplish this because it's personal to them.
Right.
Right. It's not just a homework assignment that they have to fulfill.
Right.
Right. So.
Right. Exactly.
And then, so 3D modeling. So something that's really important is how are these students going to actually design something? How are they going to create something, right? And so that's a big question that we have to ask ourselves, right? Are they going to do tutorials? Is there going to be a guided lesson? Do you as the teacher know how to use 3D modeling right now? If you don't, that's okay. So what are the resources available to you? And so, Liz, I think you might have talked about this the last time you did the webinar, but how did you go about learning 3D modeling? How did you teach your students?
Yeah, so when I first started to learn 3D modeling, I just was playing around with it. Changing, pulling in things from Thingiverse and changing them a little bit, or trying to copy them.
Okay.
And then I started to create my own. And that's really what we see with teachers and students, is that they need to copy, then change, then create, and in that order to really feel like they have ownership of a new tool or technology.
Right.
With our students and our teachers, we ask them to build a name tag for their first assignment. So we give them the dimensions, we talk about how to shape it, and everyone gets to add their own name. So they're changing it a little bit, but it has the same basic shape on it for the beginning parts. So that's how we do it. We also allow teachers and students to use the tutorials to learn and encourage them to go on the internet and find tutorials to help them figure out how to 3D model the way they want.
Gotcha. And then as additional resources, we also have MakerBot certification, which we'll be talking about a little bit later on, but it's for both educators and students, and they learn some very basic design skills in Tinkercad. Then we have our suggestions for where to go to learn, for more advanced software like Fusion 360. And I think, Liz, you also hold workshops, right, for 3D modeling?
Yeah. We hold workshops for 3D modeling, 3D printing. We're starting to do some virtual workshops on 3D modeling and 3D printing, which I'm really excited about. So check out ymaker.co for more information on that.
Great.
So after we think about how students are going to learn how to 3D model, we need to help them ideate. And ideate means to put your idea together. So we want students to start thinking about how they're going to put their idea together for that challenge you gave them a couple slides back. So this is where students are going to be brainstorming, planning, and redesigning. So they will brainstorm. You want them to write down every idea they have for brainstorms. Specifically, middle school students have so much creativity in their brains that they just need to be encouraged to get it out. So have them write down as many ideas. Give them like a crazy number. Be like, come up with 30 different brainstorms.
Right.
And they will, even if they're crazy, even if it involves aliens coming from outer space. It's fine. Let them write it down. Let them be creative. That's the point.
Right. I think it's important to also say that there's no wrong idea when you're brainstorming. Like anything that you're thinking of, write it down.
Yep. Yeah. And I also I can't think of any more. Okay, what if you just changed it a little bit? What would it look like? And that usually spurs a whole new idea. After the students have all this opportunity to brainstorm, they start to they choose their final design and they create a detailed sketch. So it needs to be really detailed and have measurements and sizes and the specifications that they need and they want. Also, we give children the opportunity to prototype their design, whether that means making it out of clay or cardboard or paper, if they feel that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And then we redesign. So they look at their final design and they test their design. They gather feedback from other people. And they improve their design as necessary through the prototyping phase here. Now, logistics. Every teacher's favorite part. So the logistics is a lot of teacher-heavy work where the teacher needs to plan it out really well. And that's okay. The more you plan ahead, the more successful you'll be throughout the project. So don't skimp on the planning and say, I'll figure it out later. Let's try to figure out as much as we can now so that we're ready when we have all of our students in there printing.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about like the logistics of our whole project, we think about that the ideate phase that we just went through. We think about how students are 3D modeling. We think about how they're reviewing their models and getting them ready to print. Then thinking about how they're transferring them to the printer,
right.
And then how they print.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to think about all these stages with what your work you're doing with your students when we think about the logistics of the project.
Mm-hmm. So with 3D modeling, there's a lot of essential questions that you need to be asking yourself and thinking about how this is going to be done with your students. So some of them are, how will students practice using the 3D modeling software? And I think you mentioned a really good example, making name tags.
Yeah.
I know Tinkercad for sure has a name tag tutorial too, and so it walks you through the whole process of getting familiar with working in a 3D space inside a computer. Moving things around, pushing and pulling objects to be able to make that name tag.
Yep.
And there's a bunch of other softwares that also have different types of tutorials. Other questions, how long will students have to model their final design? Like you said, 3D printing is very much an iterative process. Nothing's going to be perfect the first time around. And so I think we have to make sure that we time that well, that students have enough time to kind of go back, make some small changes to their design, and then see what they get.
Right.
What will each student in the group be working on? And so I think this is important because, we have finite resources, right? We're not going to have a printer for every student. And so a lot of the times for some of these projects, we have to work in groups. And so we have to assign students specific roles within the group. And so it's important to think about, what parts are essential to making this project work and how that can be broken up into roles.
In the project planning guide, there are some tips on how to group students and how to help them be successful with working in groups and how a teacher can facilitate that for students.
That's true. And then some other important things that will make your life a lot easier is thinking of a naming convention for your files. If you're dealing with 30 students, that means you might have 30 files to deal with. And so finding a way to name those files, sometimes I've seen, putting a student's last name for the name of the file, the date or the group that they're working in.
Right.
Have you seen other tips?
The color that they want to print in. If you put that in the file name, then you can easily access the order that things need to be printed in. And also be very explicit and share that with your students. It's kind of like, make sure your name's on the top of the paper, make sure your file is named correctly, or else we're not going to be able to print it. Yeah. And how students their 3D models will be reviewed prior to printing. There's some great resources out there for peer reviewing Tinkercad files. I know that there's some on Teacher Pay Teacher where students can go and it's like interview questions. Let me look at your file and check your Tinkercad file to make sure that it's correct. And just alleviates a little bit of pressure on the teacher and stops the teacher from being the stopgap in the classroom.
Right. Because it is important to review these files to make sure that they're good for 3D printing, because we don't want to find out that a file doesn't actually work for printing when it's printing or halfway through a print and it's failed, right? So we want to be prepared for that. We want to save our resources. And so, having students go through that sort of interview process or teaching them about, what's important to make a good 3D print is essential to, saving you time, resources, and making a successful project.
And peer reviewing is such a thing we do as adults all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So teaching those skills is really helpful.
All right, and then so to the MakerBot and beyond. So now that we have our STL files, and for those of you who are new to 3D printing, STL files are the 3D printable files. They're the files that you see, if you visit us on thingiverse.com, if you've been to Tinkercad before, those are the files you usually see available there. Those are the files that our MakerBot program can see and prepare for printing. So once the students have these STLs, how do we actually transfer them to our MakerBot printer? So with the MakerBot printer, there's a variety of ways that you can send files to the printer. It can be through Jump Drive, which is the most direct way to do it. You save your sliced STL file to your Jump Drive, you take it directly to the printer, and you hit print. So super easy, right? But there's other ways to do it. So say if the printer's just a little bit far away, or say it's at the library, you can connect to the printer through Wi-Fi connection if you've connected to it before. So you can send your sliced STL file to your printer through Wi-Fi, through the cloud. Another way to do it is using a USB cable that hooks up directly from the printer to the computer. So these methods have their pros and cons. Some offer a very direct connection. Others allow you to connect from far away, or can make the process a little bit more convenient. But I know with schools, there can be issues with how the network is set up. It can be different firewalls, different permissions. Sometimes you're not allowed to connect to other devices, and so it can be a little bit tricky. So recommend exploring these 3 options to find the best one for you. And other key questions for when you're preparing your prints. So how will a sliced file be generated? And what a sliced file means is that it's the digital model, and our MakerBot print software has looked at that digital model, analyzed it, and figured out how it's actually going to print all of those layers for you. Okay? So we need to figure out how that file is going to be generated, usually through MakerBot print, and how will the order of prints be determined? So which prints will print first? And then what colors of filament for printing will be decided on. So within the guide, Liz actually listed out a lot of different ways that we can answer that question.
Yeah, there's a lot of different logistical ways that we can help our students and help ourselves be successful in printing successfully. So the new Tinkercad Classrooms has a pretty cool feature where a teacher can set up a Tinkercad Classroom. If you don't want to check Tinkercad Classroom, it's like pretty awesome. It's a little bit like Google Classroom, if you're familiar with that, where a teacher sets up an account and students get logged in to that like classroom, and teachers have access to all students' files. So now teachers can pull STL files right from their class onto one computer, which I think is amazing when there's so many kids and so many things going on.
Right.
That really does save a lot of time. But also, I've known teachers who we used to actually have designated jump drives for colors.
Oh.
So this is the purple jump drive. So if you want your file to be printed in purple, put it on this jump drive.
Right.
And they had like a 3D printed of the color tag on it, like when you like get paint chips or something, and the kids would know to use that to put their file on. So that was really helpful. We also would there's also like if you make one Tinkercad account and have everyone log on to that Tinkercad account,
right.
You can pull all the information from there. And also you could designate specific printers for specific colors, or create a list of the colors, like the order it's going to be. First we're going to do red, then we're going to do blue.
Right.
So kids know when their print is coming up. When's am I going to print? When's am I going to print? When we get to the color green.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to know that, you might not have all of the colors to print with, right? And so sometimes students might not have the option to choose a specific color. And I know you mentioned in the guide that you said, you could print with white filament, use some Sharpies or markers to color in, so that's a way to get around that as well.
They love that. They love doing that, because then it's really personalized. And it really, if you're printing a lot, it gives students who finish first something to do. So they spend time coloring it in.
Right.
And it's really great strategy.
Timeline.
So thinking about the timeline of your project. You can use this blank timeline guide in the project planning guide to help you organize everything that's going to happen for your project. You want to use this timeline guide to help you think about when students are going to learn that academic content, when they're going to learn about World War II. They still need to know the content. How are they going to learn that content? Are they going to watch some videos? Is it going to be direct instruction? Is it going to be, are they going to interview someone? Are they going to read a story? What are they going to do to still learn that academic content?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to write that wherever that's going to happen in your project. The beginning of the project, the middle of the project, the end of the project. You're going to want to think about when students are going to learn about the project design challenge. So all the way back to the beginning, what is that design challenge that students are tasked with? When are you going to tell them that?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to tell them right up front, which I think is a good idea because then it gets their minds to start thinking about the project?
Right.
Or are you going to tell them that at another time? When are students going to learn the modeling software? Are they going to learn that by themselves at home doing tutorials? Is it going to be like an in-class thing? When are they going to learn that modeling software? When are they going to ideate? So when are they going to do the brainstorming? When are they going to do the planning? When are they going to do the reviewing?
Mm-hmm.
How are students going to spend time doing that? When are students going to review each other's work, right? To make sure that their prints are
Right.
good and ready to
Peer
print
review.
and ready to go, that peer review. When are students going to be able to transfer their projects to print?
Mm-hmm.
When is that going to happen? It's going to probably towards the end. You also want to think of another activity students are going to be doing while they're waiting
Mm-hmm.
for their project to print. That could be a reflection. So self-reflection on these projects are really, really great. Have students self-reflect and assess their own learning. What did they learn? What went well? What didn't go well? And how are students going to display their work? Because that's a huge part of it too.
Yeah.
Like putting their work on display or presenting it to someone. How are they going to do that? When are they going to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And as a teacher, at what benchmark points are you going to assess students? When are you going to check in with them to make sure that they understand the content, they know the content? When are you going to check in with them to understand that they know how to 3D print? When are you going to 3D model? When are you going to check in with them to make sure that their 3D model is good for 3D printing, is
Mm-hmm.
ready to go? And then how are you going to assess all of their learning for this project?
And I think it's important having this timeline. I think it's super helpful to educators because, when we're introduced to this technology and we get it and it clicks with us, we think of all the ways that we can apply this.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, okay, wait, but how am I going to do it?
Right.
I have all of these ideas. I want to get started now. And so I
Mhm.
think this really helps to kind of, organize your thinking process a little bit, break it all down so
Right.
it's nice and ordered. You know how long this is going to take, what you
Mhm.
can do, like you said, in the downtime while things are printing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Back one.
Yeah, just back. We're not there yet.
You didn't do it yet. Awesome. So the last part is the assessment. And all teachers want to assess their students and make sure that they learn. And you need to ask yourself, what's important to assess your students on in this project? They made major growth through this project. They didn't know how to 3D print before, or they didn't have a 3D print, and now they do.
Mhm.
That's amazing. They probably learned so much. How are you going to assess that they learned what they learned? So you want to go back to those objectives we created at the beginning when we talked about what's the big idea, what are the essential skills students are going to learn, what's the technology and tools students are going to learn, and you want to determine if they met them or if they didn't meet them. And be open and honest with students about how they met those goals and how they didn't. This is a different kind of rubric that I've been exploring with lately where we put those objectives down the middle and we say concerns or areas of needs for those objectives, they met them or they're exceeding those. And we write in any of those columns, evidence of that happening.
Mm-hmm.
Peer evaluation can really help you gain insight into group work. So have students evaluate each other in groups really will help you, the teacher, know what's happening in that group because kids will be honest.
Mhm.
They'll be very honest. And it'll be really helpful to you as a teacher to know that. Another one of my favorite tips is if you tell each group, if I gave you $100, how would, for your work on this project, how would that money be split up?
Oh, that's a good question.
And kids get it. High school kids get that. Middle school kids get that. Younger kids get that. So that, you know, you will see really quickly who did a lot of work and who didn't.
Right.
So that's a little fun trick that we use a lot. And student self-evaluation and reflection. How are they going to assess what they did? How are they going to assess what they learned? How they grew? Because our true learning and our growth happens when we look back and see what we didn't know before and what we do know now. There's tons of research out there that supports that that idea, that when you think about, you know, what you've learned, you actually solidify it into your brain and you've learned it.
Right. It's a great way to do it.
And another one of my favorite resources, and you'll get all of these links later, is from the New York State CTE Center, the Career and Technical Education Technical Assistance Center. It is the Life Career Competencies Framework. It helps you as a teacher identify performance measures for students learning on all sorts of different professional and essential skills that kids need to learn. It's a really awesome way to make rubrics, so check it out for all things. And you did it. You planned a project. This project planning guide is going to be incredibly helpful for you with going through all this. There's a lot of detailed information in here.
Very much.
When you get done with your project, I really want you as a teacher to reflect on what went well, what were the surprises that you weren't prepared for, what do you need to learn more about? Maybe I need to learn more about how to unclog my printer. Maybe I need to learn more about how to 3D model. What are you going to do differently next time? And did your students meet or exceed your expectations? So those reflective questions will really help you as a teacher elevate each one of your 3D printing projects to the next level.
Agreed. And the great thing about this guide is that it is you take an active role in this. So there's questions that you fill out, things for you to consider, things for you to think about as you're planning out this project, as far as, you know, timing, what are my students going to be doing, what am I as a teacher going to be planning out or preparing for. And so, yeah, there's a lot of blanks in there for you to fill out, so you can start thinking about the project that you'll be creating for your classroom. And then, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about additional resources for educators. So Liz mentioned, you know, the teacher reflection, you know, what, you know, did I struggle with? What do I want to learn more about? You know, maybe I need to learn more about, you know, why my extruder jammed, or 3D modeling, or, you know, how I can further use this technology in the classroom. So we have a few resources for you. The first one here is the MakerBot Educator's Guidebook. And so this is an actual printed book, and it's broken down into 3 parts. The first part is a crash course into 3D printing, which is super helpful. It helps to break it down for you. It tells you, you know, what an STL is, what slicing means, you know, how do I even print in the first place. And then it includes 9 lesson plans that were created by educators for educators. And this spans K through 12 students. These all have standards included in the lesson plans as well. And it has everything you need from what are the objectives, the instructions. If I'm not familiar with the modeling program, it has all the instructions for you so that you know how to use it. It also shows you how much time it's going to take, the filament, all of the resources. So all the questions are answered for you within this book. The last part, which I always think is great for art teachers, is post-processing. So how do you post-process a print? How do you remove the things that are essential for making a successful print? How are you going to sand your prints? How do you paint them? Definitely talked a lot about painting your prints. So definitely recommend checking out the MakerBot Educator's Guidebook. And then after that, we have the certification programs. So if you want to learn kind of the tips and tricks that we have, you know, for unjamming extruders, for getting successful prints started, you know, if you run into an issue, you know, what do? Certification is the answer for you, especially if you're an educator and you find yourself with this printer in the classroom suddenly, because we all know that happens a lot, right? And so it takes you through the setup process, the essential parts of the printer, troubleshooting, which is super important, We have a wonderful support team here at MakerBot, but we know as teachers, you don't always have time to be on the phone or answering emails, so you want to be supplied with that knowledge so that when something happens, you know exactly what to do. Through the certification program for educators, you're also walked through creating a project for students as well. And then if we go to the next slide, we also, if we go one back, we also have certification for students, which is brand new, it just came out this year. And for students, they also learn about, you know, how to use the printer, how to troubleshoot, how to take ownership of this technology. And the second component of this is about design thinking, but with 3D printing in mind. So we mentioned, you know, creating solutions to problems around us. So students take note of their environment, they see what they can fix, and we teach them ways to go about it, how to think in a design thinking way, but for 3D printing. So designing a problem, designing a solution with 3D printing. If it doesn't work out the first time around, you know, it's okay. They're going through that iterative process, right? They're ideating. And so through that process, they actually are able to document the whole process as they think of a solution, they sketch it out on paper, they kind of have a variety of solutions that they can go with. There's like a process of elimination, and so they go through the whole design thinking process, and then at the end, they kind of present their solution to their teacher, to their classroom, however the teacher decides to present that portion of certification. And then the last part is designing for 3D printing in mind. So what it takes to make a design that will be successful with 3D printing. So keeping in mind terms like supports and infill and shells and a bunch of terminology that we might not know yet. Certification program walks you through it and helps students design for that in mind. And then we have MakerBot Educators program. So within the MakerBot Educators program, it's essentially our ambassadors program. And so here is where you can join a community of educators who are working to do the same thing, right? They're looking to integrate this technology into the classroom. They've already started. They're creating lesson plans. They have a direct line of communication with the education team. And we also support them. So if they are going to EDU conferences and they want to talk about the impact of 3D printing in the classroom, you know, we're happy to support them. Through this program, you also receive a really nice t-shirt, some cool stickers, and there's monthly challenges where you can get free filament as well. And so that brings us to the end of our webinar, and I hope Sean has recorded some questions for us.
I do indeed. So, got a number of questions here. Actually, the first one I think carries on from the last slide you had there, Andrea. Okay. Asking about the Education Ambassador Program. How do you actually apply to become an Education Ambassador for MakerBot? Like, where do you go? And also, how do you do a webinar with MakerBot like Liz is doing?
Oh, two very good questions. So the first question was, how do I join the MakerBot Educators Program, our Ambassadors Program? So we do ask that you create a lesson plan, and a way to do that is through the certification program for educators, where you're asked to create a lesson plan. Since you already create a lesson plan, we ask that you submit it to thingiverse.com, which is our website where we have those 700 lesson plans. And upon approval, you are accepted into the program. There's just an application that you have to fill out so that we can send you that t-shirt. So you can apply through the Educators Program. You can also go to Thingiverse Education, and you will find the form to apply to our Ambassador Program there. We will be still asking you to submit a lesson plan. So that's the way to join the Ambassador Program. And then the second question was, how can I run a webinar with MakerBot, right? Yeah. It's a great question. So reach out to us. Our moderator will be sending everyone a follow-up email. And so just reply back and say that you're interested in running a webinar, but tell us why. Tell us why you want to run a webinar, what you would want to include in this webinar, and how you would run it. We definitely want to know, and we're always happy to hear from our educators about what they want to bring to MakerBot, what you guys want us to present as well. We're always listening.
Cool. The next question I have here is, what are the prerequisites for using 3D printing, and what grade levels can you expect to use 3D printers in the classroom?
Good question.
I can start it off. So the great thing about 3D printers, particularly MakerBot, we've worked very hard to make the process easier. 3D printers can be very tricky to work with at times, right? But here at MakerBot, we've really worked to make the process a lot more simple. So in terms of, getting started, doing a print, and we even have, a good ecosystem for educators where they can grow, through certification programs, through these webinars as well. And so I'd say, I've seen 3D printing used really in all grade levels. If you want to jump on that.
We worked with a school, and we had first grade teachers. We were training first grade teachers to 3D print with their students in a design thinking way. And it was really successful. It does take a little bit of time for younger children to understand the 3D world of 3D design, and it takes a lot of more effort on a teacher's part to get an STL file, save it the right way. But having first graders 3D model is not the craziest thing, and the MakerBots make it really easy for students to understand how that happens. Prerequisites: before we get to 3D printing, we need to create a 3D model. So that is understanding how the 3D world works and being able to get to a computer that allows you to 3D model using Tinkercad is really the only prerequisite. And the rest is your imagination. Whatever you can imagine,
right, absolutely,
you can make.
And the great thing about Tinkercad is that you don't have to download a software, so you don't need, IT to type in their password to download the software. You can access it right away. And like you said, they have the Tinkercad classrooms to make it a lot easier for you as the teacher to manage all those files.
Okay, great. And the next question I have here is, how many projects per school year would you recommend? Also, is one printer really enough for a classroom?
Well, as far as the printers, I'd say it depends how big your classroom is. If you're working with one printer and you have a large group of students, definitely recommend breaking the classroom up into groups. Usually I think we recommend having 2 printers, just so that more students are able to print, and gives them a bit more time as well.
In terms of grouping for students and 3D printing, typically in the real world, unless they're in the MakerBot office, there aren't millions of 3D printers around for everyone to have their own printer. So in the real world, people work together on designing and creating a solution to a problem, and then the best solution gets printed. And that's not typically how we work in schools. We want everybody to be able to print something.
Right.
So it is okay to say to kids, not everybody can print. Only the best projects can print. And putting the onus back on the students to determine which ones are the best. Okay, here are the specifications, here are the constraints. As a team, talk through which one of these meets the design challenge, and then that one prints.
Right. And then in terms of answering the first question, how many projects are good, how many 3D projects are good for, say, like a semester? It's hard to say depending on, the grade level, the skill level, because for, high school, the higher up you go in grade levels, a lot of the lessons are going to be where you're designing for a problem, you're experimenting, and so you're iterating a lot, and those classes are definitely going to take a few more class periods to do.
I never try to let a project run longer than 3 weeks. And I think most units are structured like that in schools, where they never really run more than 3 weeks. I know as a teacher, after 3 weeks, I'm like, that's enough, I'm done with this, we need to move on to something else. And the kids feel like that too. So thinking about that and how that would fit into your content and how many, units you do a year, and building up their skills. And if you start at the beginning of the school year, now with learning how to 3D model, learning how to get the file to the MakerBot, that process will go faster and faster as the year goes on, and students will be able to print more and more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
As the year goes on. So potential to create a lot.
All right, next question is, okay, I've ordered a Replicator Plus. What do I need to get started? Anything I should prepare before I receive it? And what should I expect to have to do when I get it? What's the setup like?
Well, I think I'll let you answer this question first, since you were kind of in the exact same position before.
Yes. So the printer has arrived. and they're in a beautiful brown box, and you have to get them out of the box and somewhere. Before they arrive, I would make sure that you have a space for them, and you want the space to be a stable surface. I've seen 3D printers on rolling carts, and that doesn't work all the time because the carts move and then the print gets messed up and nobody can figure out why it's not working. It's because it's on a rolling cart and the cart is moving, so it's hard it's like an earthquake all the time. It can't print. So find a space that's solid, that's not moving, and an outlet to plug it into. When we first got our first MakerBot, it was in a tiny closet behind a door, and it had no airflow, and I was so nervous the printer was going to overheat and it wouldn't work and everything would melt. So I 3D printed a doorstop to keep that door of the closet open so that air would flow through it. That was my first 3D printing project, to explore the MakerBot and the 3D printing software. And then that project took off like wild cakes around the school. So you want to make sure that you have a steady surface, somewhere to plug it in. Then you can follow the instructions and try to set it up yourself, and if you need help, you want to find your IT people. And sometimes, as a teacher, you have to give up your lunch preps for the next 7 years and your free time just to get the IT people to come in and help you set up and do their bus duty for 4 months during the winter, just so that they will come in and set up your 3D printer. And once it's all set up, now we can start our project.
Right.
So in the time it's getting delivered and it's getting set up, start thinking about that project you want to do with your students. Start playing around with the 3D modeling software, so that you're ready to go. When that printer is up and running, you have your students ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important to bring in the IT people early on in the process, because downloading software into your computer is never easy when you're out of school, right? You have to get that software approved, then they have to come in, they have to download it. And so it can be a tricky process, right? So you want to make sure that your IT person or team is looped in. Like you said, start experimenting with the software, even Tinkercad. You can design without having a 3D printer, so you can get started on those designs. And even we have our support site where we have our knowledge base with, getting started with all of the printers that we have. So, you might not have your printer there yet, but you can start kind of getting familiarized with the printer, with how it works, even get started on, if something goes wrong, what do I do? What's my next course of action? How do I contact the support team if I need to? So having that knowledge beforehand is really going to set you up for success.
And just to add to that, I think not only getting a new printer, but also inheriting a 3D printer.
Yes.
I feel like we see that a lot with educators, right?
Right, absolutely. So Sean mentioned that a lot of the times we inherit printers, or we move to a new classroom and we find a MakerBot printer under a few boxes, or it's all dusty, it's become a paperweight, right? Which we never want to see, right? Because this technology is so important to start using with our students to prepare them for the future. And this technology isn't always easy to get. So to find out, that there's a 3D printer in the classroom, we definitely want to get started with it, especially on the right foot. And, you mentioned finding printers in the classroom or inheriting them. Sometimes those printers haven't been used, right, for years, or maybe something went wrong with it, or the previous person just didn't know how to use it, right? And so having these resources like the support site, like the MakerBot Educators Guidebook, certification, can really help to kind of jumpstart you on the right path with 3D printing.
And there are some great professional learning communities out there on social media. There's a great Facebook group, Classroom 3D Printing, or 3D Printing in the Classroom. There's been a really lively Twitter hashtag, 3D Printing ED, with tons of people out there that are ready to help you with whatever you need with your 3D printer if you want to reach out that way.
Right, yes. And I know some of our educators also host Twitter talks. Like every Thursday, one of our educators, Kevin Reineman, will host a Twitter talk and say, to all the teachers on Twitter, what are you doing with 3D printing? How are you using it? What are you running into? And so it really creates this community really across the world of these teachers, of educators using 3D printing.
Okay. Yeah. One more question we'll do is I guess how much is it to get started, and are there grants available?
Yeah, so how much is it to get started? I highly recommend reaching out to our sales team or to the reseller that you have affiliated with your school district, as they will be selling our printers and our resources, so they will be able to give you the best price. As far as grants, yes, we definitely do have a grant guide. We release a grant guide every single year. We've released the one for 2019 a few months ago. And so we highly recommend looking into the grant guide. It is available on our website for you to check out. Some of them are specific to states. The list of grant guides are specific to, new technology in the classroom, materials, 3D printers as well. I highly recommend checking it out because we are definitely here to support you.
Yep.
Mhm.
YMaker has a list of grants also for all sorts of maker space